No one wanted the house destroyed by the tree, until this woman did something incredible. Jessica Mitchell knew she was making the worst decision of her life when she signed those papers with trembling hands. The orange chainsaw felt heavy in her hands as she looked at the wooden house completely destroyed by the century-old tree that had fallen over a year ago. But she had no choice. It was that, or sleep on the street. The situation had started 3 months earlier, when she lost her job at the architecture firm in New York. At 30 years old, Jessica thought her career was just beginning, but the economic crisis didn't even spare the most reputable offices. The last penny of her savings account was spent on the rent for the apartment where she lived, and when the landlord asked her to leave, only 2 options remained: go back to her mother's house in Pennsylvania, or try something completely insane. That's when she saw the ad in the local newspaper for a small town called Hope Valley, in the countryside of New York. House for sale for $15,000. The price was so low it seemed like a typo. Jessica called the realtor immediately. "Look, my dear, I'm going to be honest with you," said Sandra Johnson, the realtor on the other end of the line. "This house is beyond saving. A giant tree fell on it and destroyed almost everything. It's been on the market for over a year, and no one even wants to take a look." Jessica felt her heart race. $15,000 was exactly what she had managed to save by selling her furniture and car. It was a sign, or at least that's what she wanted to believe. "Can I go see it today?" she asked. "Are you sure? I've had 3 families who gave up just from looking at the damage. It's a lot of headache for little money." "Yes, I'm sure." 2 hours later, Jessica was on the road driving a rental car toward Hope Valley. The town had fewer than 5,000 residents and was hidden among soybean and cornfields. It was the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and news travels faster than the wind. When she arrived at the property, Jessica understood why no one had been interested. The wooden house, which must have been beautiful in its day, was completely shattered. The immense tree had fallen right in the middle of the structure, breaking the main beams and creating a huge hole in the roof. Branches and dried leaves covered the entire structure, and what was left of the walls was rotting from the moisture. "I warned you," said Sandra, getting out of the car and fixing her graying hair. "It's impossible to save this. The land is good, but to build something new here, you'd spend at least $100,000, and I'm being optimistic." Jessica walked around the property without saying a word. The land was larger than she had imagined, with almost 2 hectares of green space. The tree that had fallen was truly impressive. It must have been over 100 years old, and the trunk was so wide that 3 people couldn't wrap their arms around it. There was something mesmerizing about the way the branches spread over the wreckage, as if nature were trying to reclaim that space. "Who lived here?" asked Jessica. "An elderly couple, Mr. George and Mrs. Margaret. Very beloved people in town. They had a beautiful garden back here, full of plants they used to make teas and home remedies. Half the town has taken some preparation from Mrs. Margaret." "And where are they now?" Sandra hesitated. "They had to move to a nursing home in the neighboring town. They didn't have the money to rebuild, and their children live far away. It was really very sad, actually. They loved this place." Jessica approached the part of the house that was less damaged. Through a broken window, she could see that there was a small annex that the tree hadn't hit. It was as if that little corner had been protected by a miracle. "Can I go in?" she asked. "At your own risk." The floor might be rotten. Jessica tested each board before stepping. The annex was small but in surprisingly good condition. There were wooden shelves on the walls, some gardening tools, and several empty glass jars neatly arranged. "They kept the seeds here," explained Sandra. "Mr. George was known for growing plants that no one else could. They said he had a blessed touch." It was at that moment that Jessica made the decision. It made no sense, she knew that. She had no money for renovations, knew no one in town, and had no idea how to solve that situation. But there was something about that place that spoke louder than reason. "I want to buy it," she said. Sandra stopped fiddling with her phone and looked at her as if she had misheard. "What do you mean, dear? Are you serious?" "Completely serious. $15,000, right? I can pay in cash." "Listen, Jessica, you seem like a smart girl. Don't do something crazy on impulse. This house is beyond saving. You'd be better off looking for something smaller in town, an apartment or a simple little house. No, Jessica shook her head. It's here, I feel it's here. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Sandra sighed and began explaining all the problems Jessica would face. There was no working electricity, the plumbing was destroyed, the main structure was compromised, and on top of that, the city required a series of permits for any kind of renovation. Not to mention that the nearest neighbors were over 500 meters away. And there's something else, said Sandra, lowering her voice. People in town are saying that tree fell for a reason. Some believe it's punishment for something Mr. George did in the past. What kind of thing? Small-town nonsense, you know how it is. They say he practiced witchcraft with those plants of his, that the remedies worked too well to be normal. Jessica almost laughed. Do you believe that? Me? Of course not. But some people do, and that could make your life difficult here. This place has a bad reputation now. Even so, Jessica didn't change her mind. 3 days later, she was back in Hope Valley with a signed purchase contract and a suitcase with her only belongings. She had rented a room at Mrs. Dorothy's boarding house, a friendly lady who ran the only establishment of its kind in town. Girl, you really bought that house? Asked Mrs. Dorothy, serving black coffee in the late afternoon. Everyone in town is talking about it. Yes, I did. Why does everyone find it so strange? Because anyone who knows that place knows it can't be saved. That tree didn't fall for no reason, dear. It had been there for over 100 years and had withstood terrible storms. Suddenly, on a sunny morning, it fell on its own. Jessica took a sip of the coffee and felt the bitterness on her tongue. Things just happen sometimes. Trees get old and fall. Maybe, Mrs. Dorothy shook her head, but her tone wasn't convinced. I just think you should have talked to people who knew Mr. George and Mrs. Margaret before making that decision. Why? Did they do something wrong? No, it's not that. They were good people, very well liked around here. It's just... She hesitated. Their family is a bit complicated. There are some stories you should know about. Before Jessica could ask anything else, the boarding house door opened, and a tall man about 50 years old with sunburned skin and calloused hands entered. He greeted Mrs. Dorothy with a nod and looked at Jessica with curiosity. This is the young lady who bought Mr. George's property, introduced Mrs. Dorothy. Jessica, this is Robert. He lives on the farm next door. Robert approached and extended his hand. Pleasure to meet you. I heard you're an architect. That's right. And you're really going to try to renovate that house? Yes, I am. Robert exchanged a meaningful look with Mrs. Dorothy. Can I give you some advice, since you're new in town and don't know the situation? Of course. Be careful what you might find there. Mr. George kept many things that might be better left alone. What kind of things? Plants, seeds, old recipes. Robert lowered his voice. There are people in town who don't like the idea of disturbing all that. Jessica felt a chill in her stomach. Has someone threatened me for buying the house? No, it's not that. It's just that working with herbs and medicinal plants requires knowledge, and Mr. George had secrets that not everyone approved of. That night, Jessica couldn't sleep well. She kept thinking about Robert's words and wondering if she hadn't made the biggest mistake of her life. But when the sun rose and she saw the first rays of light coming through the bedroom window, she felt a renewed determination. There was something about that place that called to her, and she wasn't going to give up because of small-town superstitions. The next morning, Jessica returned to the property with the rented chainsaw and some basic tools. The first thing she needed to do was clear the smaller branches and gain access to the interior of the house. The work was harder than she imagined. The chainsaw weighed heavy in her arms, and she had never used one in her life. It was then that she heard a voice behind her. If you cut there, the branch will fall on your head. Jessica turned and saw a white-haired lady, well-groomed despite her age, watching her with a gentle smile. She must have been in her 70s, but her eyes were lively and intelligent. Sorry, I didn't hear you arrive. I'm Eleanor. I live in the blue house over there. She pointed to a small, well-kept building on the neighboring property. "I came to see how you were doing." "Oh, that's great. I'm Jessica. I don't think I'm doing very well, to be honest." Eleanor laughed. "You've never used a chainsaw, have you? It shows. Do you want me to call my grandson to help? He knows about these things." "That would be great, if it's not too much trouble." "Of course not. Actually, I've been dying to meet you. It's been a long time since anyone showed interest in this place." While waiting for Eleanor's grandson to arrive, the two women walked around the property. Eleanor knew every corner of that land. "Maria and I were very close friends," she told her. "We spent hours talking here in her garden. This place was magical, really. Not in the way the townspeople think, but because of the love they put into every plant. Do people really believe there was something supernatural going on here? Some do. But it's just ignorance. What George did was science, not witchcraft. He studied plants for decades, knew exactly which combination to use for each problem. Maria's remedy for joint pain was better than anything from the pharmacy." "Where are they now?" Eleanor's face saddened. "At St. Francis Home, in the neighboring town. It's a decent place, but they're suffering being so far from here. This house was their life. Can I visit them? I'm sure they'd love that, especially if you tell them you're trying to save the place." Eleanor's grandson arrived a few minutes later. Brandon was about 25 years old, a mechanic who knew how to handle tools like no one else. In 2 hours, he managed to cut and remove all the branches blocking access to the house. "The structure is worse than it looks," he said, examining the main beams. "But it's not impossible to save. You'll need to replace a lot of things, but the foundation seems solid." "How much do you think it would cost to make it at least livable?" Brandon scratched his head. "Well, being very optimistic and doing a lot of manual labor, about $40,000. But that's by cutting corners on everything." Jessica Mitchell's heart tightened. She had exactly $600 in her account, which had to last until she could find some work. $40,000 felt like 40 million. "But you don't have to do it all at once," Brandon continued. "You can do it in parts. First, you focus on making one room livable, then expand as you get money. Would you be willing to do this work?" "Yes, I would. But I'll be honest with you. I can't work for free. I have my family to support." "Of course, I completely understand." When Brandon left, Jessica was alone, contemplating the wreckage. Reality was starting to sink in. Even if she got a job immediately, it would take years to save enough money for the renovation. And who could guarantee she'd find work in such a small town? That's when she decided to explore the annex that had remained intact more thoroughly. With a flashlight in hand, she examined every corner of the small space. The shelves were full of empty glass jars, labeled with plant names she had never heard of: bird's herb, stonebreaker, holy thorn, carqueja. In one of the drawers of an old wooden table, she found a notebook covered in floral fabric. The pages were yellowed, but the handwriting was clear and neat. It was Mrs. Margaret's gardening diary, with notes on when to plant each species, how to make preparations, and even small drawings of the plants. Jessica flipped through the notebook, fascinated. There were recipes for practically every health problem imaginable: headaches, stomach issues, insomnia, anxiety. And at the end of the notebook, a surprise: several pages dedicated to a plant called Our Lady's Tear, with detailed notes on how rare and valuable it was. "It's an almost extinct species," was written in Mrs. Margaret's handwriting. "George managed to grow only 3 seedlings in 20 years of attempts. The seeds are stored in the blue jar, more precious than gold." Jessica's heart raced. She searched among the jars until she found a blue glass one, smaller than the others, hidden behind the tools. Inside it were about 20 small, dark seeds. At that moment, she heard footsteps outside. It was Eleanor, who had returned with a lunchbox and a bottle of water. "I thought you might be hungry," the woman said. "I brought some lunch." "How kind." "Eleanor, can I ask you something? Do you know anything about a plant called Our Lady's Tear?" Eleanor's face changed immediately. "Where did you hear that name?" "I found Mrs. Margaret's notes about it." Eleanor entered the annex and looked around carefully. "Did you find the seeds?" Jessica showed her the blue jar. Eleanor took it in her hands as if it were a treasure. "My goodness! Margaret always said she kept these seeds for an emergency. She told me this plant is worth a lot of money in the medicinal plant market, something like thousands of dollars per kilogram of dried leaves. Really? Yes. There are labs in the capital that pay a fortune for rare plants like this. But George never wanted to sell. He said some knowledge shouldn't be commercialized. Jessica felt a wave of hope. If she could grow those plants and sell them, maybe she'd have the money needed to renovate the house. It was a risky plan, but she was desperate. Do you know how to grow them? Not really. It was always George's specialty. But I know it's very difficult, which is why they're so rare. That afternoon, Jessica made another impulsive decision. She took the bus to the neighboring town and went to visit Mr. George and Mrs. Margaret at the nursing home. The place was clean and well kept, but there was a sadness in the air that was impossible to ignore. She found the couple sitting on the porch, looking out at the small, plain garden of the establishment. When she introduced herself as the person who had bought their property, both of their eyes filled with tears. "My dear," said Mrs. Margaret, holding Jessica's hands with surprising strength for her age, "you can't imagine how much this means to us. To think that someone cares about our home." "Not only do I care, but I want to restore everything," said Jessica. "But I need your help." Mr. George, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward. "What kind of help?" "I found your notes on the medicinal plants and the seeds of the lady's tear." The elderly man's face immediately turned serious. "You shouldn't mess with those seeds, girl. They're very dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "They're not poisonous," clarified Mrs. Margaret. "But they're coveted. There are people who would do anything to get their hands on them." "What kind of people?" The two exchanged nervous glances. Finally, Mr. George sighed and began to tell the story. 5 years ago, a lab from the capital sent representatives to our town. They were looking for rare plants for research. They offered a lot of money for our lady's tear seeds." "And you refused?" "Of course we refused. These seeds have been passed down through generations in my family. My grandfather said they must be protected, not sold." "But they didn't give up," continued Mrs. Margaret. "They started pressuring us, making bigger and bigger offers, until one day they showed up at our door with a different proposal." "What proposal?" "They said if we didn't sell willingly, they'd find a way to get them by force. That's when our troubles began." Jessica felt a chill down her spine. "What kind of troubles?" "First it was small things," explained Mr. George. "Plants dying for no reason, tools disappearing, strangers lurking around the property. Then it got worse." "The tree didn't fall on its own," said Mrs. Margaret quietly. "They did something to it." "What do you mean?" "We don't know exactly what," admitted Mr. George. "But the night before the tree fell, we heard strange noises, and when we checked the next morning, we found drill marks on the trunk." Jessica was shocked. "Did you report this to anyone?" "To whom? The town is small. We don't have the resources to investigate that kind of thing. And who would believe that a reputable company would do something like that?" "So you left because of these threats?" "Partly, yes. After the tree fell and destroyed our house, we didn't have the money to rebuild, and we were still afraid of what else they might do." Mrs. Margaret took Jessica's hand again. "Please, dear, don't get involved with those seeds. Sell the property and buy something simpler. It's not worth the risk." But Jessica couldn't think of anything else except those valuable seeds hidden in the annex of the destroyed house. If they were really worth as much money as Eleanor had said, they could be her only chance to get out of that desperate financial situation. "What if I could grow them in secret, without anyone knowing?" Mr. George shook his head. "Impossible, girl. Growing lady's tear requires very specific care, and it takes at least 2 years for the plants to be ready for harvest. You'd have to live on site, tend to them every day." "That's exactly what I plan to do. But you don't understand the risk you're taking. These people don't mess around. If they find out you have the seeds, they won't find out." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. When Jessica returned to Hope Valley that night, her mind was buzzing with plans. No matter how dangerous it was, she had no choice. It was either cultivate those plants or give up everything and go back to her mother's house defeated. At the boarding house, Mrs. Dorothy was waiting for her with a warm cup of tea and a worried expression. "Dear, a man showed up here today asking for you." "What man?" "A young man in a suit, very well dressed. He said he represented a company and wanted to talk about the property you bought." Jessica's blood ran cold. "What did you tell him?" "That you had gone out, and I didn't know when you'd be back. But he left a card." Mrs. Dorothy handed over an elegant card with gold lettering. "Derek Harrison, Commercial Representative, Advanced Biomedicine, Inc." "Did he say anything else?" "Just that he'd come back tomorrow to talk with you. He seemed like a classy, well-mannered person. But there's something strange about this card." "What?" "The address is in New York. What does a company from New York want with a rundown little house out here in the country?" Jessica didn't sleep at all that night. She kept imagining what she would say to Derek Harrison when he showed up. She couldn't tell him she had found the seeds, but she also couldn't seem too suspicious. The next morning, she decided to go to the property early and hide the blue jar better. She couldn't risk leaving the seeds in the annex if strangers were interested in the place. But when she got there, she got a surprise. Brandon was already on the property, organizing some construction materials. "Hi, Jessica. I hope you don't mind, but I decided to get a head start on the work." "What work? We haven't agreed on anything yet." "Actually, my grandmother talked to me last night and we had an idea. How about setting up a partnership arrangement?" "What do you mean?" "I'll do the renovation work and you pay me as you get the money. No rush, no interest, and if you want, I can teach you how to do some things to lower the cost." Jessica was moved by the proposal. "Why would you do this?" "Because my grandmother likes you, and because I think everyone deserves a second chance. Besides, it would be nice to have new people living around here. I accept the proposal, but there's something you need to know." Jessica told Brandon about her visit to Mr. George and Mrs. Margaret, about the company's threats, and about the man who had shown up at the boarding house looking for her. She didn't mention the special seeds, but explained that there might be complications. "I see," said Brandon after hearing everything. "Well, if any troublemakers show up around here, just call me. I have some friends who can help if needed." The two spent the morning clearing away the smaller debris and planning where to start the renovation. Brandon suggested they first focus on making the annex more comfortable, since it was the only part that wouldn't need major repairs. "Here you can sleep, cook, and take shelter from the rain," he explained. "Then we'll expand to the rest of the house." Around midday, they heard the sound of a car approaching. It was a black sedan, polished, completely out of place for the area. A man about 40 years old got out, wearing a suit despite the heat, with well-groomed hair and a smile that seemed rehearsed. "Good afternoon. Are you the owners of this property?" "I am," replied Jessica, trying to keep her voice steady. "Great. I'm Derek Harrison from Advanced Biomedicine. I left my card yesterday at the boarding house." "Yes, I received it. What can I do for you?" Derek looked around with interest, his eyes lingering longer on the preserved annex. "Our company is interested in acquiring this property. We understand you recently purchased, so perhaps we can negotiate a sale that benefits everyone. The house isn't even for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price, don't you think?" Derek smiled again, but there was something icy in that smile. "I can offer $50,000 paid in cash. That's more than triple what you paid." Jessica pretended to consider the offer, but her mind was racing. $50,000 was a lot of money, but the offer confirmed her suspicions. Derek knew exactly how much she had paid for the house. "It's an interesting proposal," she said, "but I just bought it and haven't even started my renovation plans yet." "May I ask what kind of renovations you're planning?" "Nothing too special, just making it livable." "And do you plan to work on the garden? Plant anything?" There was the real question. "I don't know much about plants," Jessica lied. "I'll probably just keep it as grass." Derek seemed to relax a bit. "I see. Well, if you change your mind about selling, look me up. My offer will still stand." He handed her another card and headed to his car. But before getting in, he turned around once more. "Oh, just out of curiosity, did the previous owners leave anything behind? Plants, seeds, any gardening materials?" "No, nothing important," Jessica replied quickly. "Just some old tools." "What a shame. Well, If you find anything interesting, let me know. Our company pays well for rare botanical material." When the car drove away, Brandon let out a low whistle. That guy gave me the creeps. What kind of company goes around offering $50,000 for a rundown house? "The same one that threatened Mr. George and Mrs. Margaret," Jessica answered. "Brandon, I need to tell you something." She led him to the annex and showed him the blue jar with the Our Lady's tear seeds. She told him about the conversation with Mrs. Margaret and Eleanor, about the value of the plants, and about her plans to grow them in secret. Brandon remained silent for a long time, examining the small dark seeds. "Do you have any idea how much risk you're taking?" he asked finally. "I do. But I also know it's my only chance to get enough money to renovate this place. What if they find out?" "They won't if we're careful." Brandon sighed. "All right, if this is what you want, I'll help you. But we'll have to be very smart." In the following days, the two developed a detailed plan. First, they would create a small discreet greenhouse behind the annex, hidden from the view of anyone passing by on the road. Second, they would study Mrs. Margaret's notes to understand exactly how to cultivate the rare plants. Third, they would establish a normal renovation routine for the house, so no one would suspect the real project. "The hardest part will be getting the materials for the greenhouse without raising suspicion," said Brandon. "Why don't we say it's for growing vegetables? It's normal for someone to want to plant their own vegetables." "Good idea." Over the weekend, Brandon brought the necessary materials: wood, transparent plastic, a basic irrigation system, and special soil for seedlings. They worked all day building a small greenhouse measuring 2 by 3 meters, well camouflaged behind fruit trees that were already on the property. Meanwhile, Jessica obsessively studied Mrs. Margaret's notebook. The notes on Our Lady's tear were detailed. The plant needed controlled humidity, temperatures between 68 and 77 degrees, soil with specific acidity, and total protection from wind. It was an extremely delicate cultivation. "According to these notes, the seeds take up to 6 weeks to germinate," said Jessica, "and the plants are only ready for harvest after 2 years. 2 years is a long time to keep a secret," Brandon observed. "I know. But we have no choice." The following Monday, they planted the 20 seeds in small pots inside the greenhouse. Jessica followed Mrs. Margaret's instructions to the letter: exact depth, special soil mixture, precise amount of water. It was like following a cake recipe, but much more important. During the first few weeks, Jessica visited the greenhouse 3 times a day. She checked the humidity, the temperature, looked for signs of germination. Derek hadn't returned, but she knew she was probably being watched. It was Eleanor who confirmed her suspicions. "Girl, there's a strange car driving down the road almost every day," the neighbor told her. "Always the same black car driving slowly as if it's watching something." "Can you see who's driving?" "Not very well, but it looks like that young man in a suit who came to talk to you." Jessica felt her stomach tighten. "Does he stop the car?" "No, he just drives by and comes back. But today I saw him stop near your property entrance and fiddle with his phone." That night, Jessica couldn't sleep. If Derek was really watching, it was only a matter of time until he discovered something. She needed a contingency plan. The next morning, she talked to Brandon about her concerns. "What if we moved the plants somewhere else?" she suggested. "Where to?" "How about at Eleanor's house? She has a big backyard and no one would suspect." "Do you trust her?" "I trust her more than this situation here." They spoke with Eleanor, who immediately agreed to help. "If it's to protect the legacy of George and Margaret, you can count on me," she said. The moving operation was done during the night. Brandon and Jessica carefully transported the pots with the seedlings, which were already starting to show the first sprouts, to a small makeshift greenhouse in the back of Eleanor's yard. The place was perfect, hidden by a tall fence and away from prying eyes. "Now you'll visit the plants as if you're visiting me," explained Eleanor. "It's the most natural thing in the world." The plan worked perfectly for a few weeks. Jessica continued managing the house renovation, normally during the day, and in the late afternoon she would have coffee with Eleanor, taking the opportunity to care for the seedlings. The plants were developing well, with green, healthy leaves growing every day. But an unexpected problem arose when Eleanor's grandson, Brandon, brought bad news. "Remember my friend who works at the city hall?" he said. "He told me someone made an anonymous complaint saying you're growing illegal plants on your property." What kind of complaint? They say you're producing drugs or something like that. Completely nonsense, but the City Hall is required to investigate. Jessica's heart raced. When? Next week. They'll send someone to inspect the property. At least the plants aren't there anymore. Yeah, but it's still worrying. Someone is trying to cause problems for you. That night, Jessica made a difficult decision. She needed to confront Derek directly and find out exactly what he wanted. She couldn't keep running and hiding anymore. The next morning, she called the number on his business card. Derek Harrison. Hi, Derek. This is Jessica Mitchell from the property in Hope Valley. I'd like to schedule a conversation with you. Great. Changed your mind about the sale? Maybe, but I'd like to better understand what kind of business your company does. Of course. I can come there today if you want. I'd prefer to meet in town. Could it be at the cafe on the main square? Perfect. How about 2 in the afternoon? Jessica arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early and chose a table where she could see the street activity. Derek arrived punctually, still wearing a suit despite the inland heat. I'm glad you reached out to me, he said, sitting down across from her. Can I order something to drink? Coffee is fine. They placed their order and sat through a few minutes of awkward silence. Finally, Jessica decided to get straight to the point. Derek, I'll be direct with you. I know your company had problems with the previous property owners, and I know you're not interested in the house, but in something specific that might be there. Derek's face subtly changed. The practiced smile gave way to a more serious expression. You're smarter than I thought. So it's true? Part of it, yes. Our company develops medicines based on rare plants. George Mitchell owned some species that are extremely valuable for our research, and when he refused to sell, you started pressuring him. Derek hesitated before answering. Sometimes it's necessary to be persuasive. We're talking about discoveries that can save lives, including cutting down the 100-year-old tree. That was an accident. The tree was old and fell by itself. That's not what I heard. Derek leaned forward, lowering his voice. Listen, Jessica, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. $100,000 for the property, plus a consulting fee of another $50,000 if you help me find what I'm looking for. And if I refuse? Why would you refuse? That's a lot of money for a destroyed house. And if I still refuse? Derek took a sip of coffee and looked her directly in the eyes. I sincerely hope you don't do that. It would be very disappointing. The threat was clear, even disguised as courtesy. Jessica felt a chill, but forced herself to maintain her composure. I need a few days to think. Of course, but don't take too long. My company isn't known for its patience. When Jessica returned to Hope Valley, she went straight to Eleanor's house. She needed to check if the plants were okay and decide what to do about Derek's threat. She found Eleanor in the backyard, watering her flowers with a worried expression. I'm glad you're here, dear. Something strange happened here today. What? A man showed up saying he was from the electric company and needed to check the poles. But he kept staring at my backyard, asking questions about plants. Jessica's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? If I grew anything special, if I knew about medicinal plants. He even asked if I'd seen the new neighbor planting anything different. What did you say? I said I didn't know anything, but I got the impression he didn't really believe me. They went to check the makeshift greenhouse. The plants were there, apparently untouched, but there were strange footprints around the area. They know, said Jessica. Somehow they found out the plants are here. What are we going to do? We need to move them again, and this time to a place they would never imagine. That night, Jessica had a risky but brilliant idea. She called St. Francis home and asked to speak with Mr. George. Mr. George, I need a very big favor. Can I bring some plants for you to take care of? What plants, girl? Your plants. The lady's tears. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You managed to germinate the seeds. I did, but now I don't have a safe place to keep them. It would be safe here, said Mr. George after thinking for a moment. They have a small garden for the residents. No one would suspect. Would you be willing to take care of them? Dear, those plants are like children to me. Of course I would. Over the weekend, Jessica and Brandon made another nighttime move. This time they transported the seedlings to the nursing home, where Mr. George and Mrs. Margaret received them as if they were lost treasures. "They're beautiful," said Mrs. Margaret, gently stroking the leaves. "You took very good care of them. Now you'll be taking care of them. I'll visit whenever I can. Don't worry, my dear. Here they'll be safe." The strategy worked perfectly. Derek and his henchmen continued watching Jessica's property and Eleanor's house, but they would never think to look in a nursing home. The plants continued to thrive under the expert care of Mr. George, who took the opportunity to teach other residents about growing medicinal plants. Meanwhile, Jessica focused on renovating the house. With Brandon's help, she managed to make the annex completely livable in 2 months. It was a small but cozy space, with a basic kitchen, a bedroom, and a living room that also served as an office. "It doesn't look like a wrecked house anymore," Brandon commented, admiring the work. "It's getting charming." "There's still a lot to do," said Jessica, "but at least now I can live here." Leaving Mrs. Dorothy's boarding house was bittersweet. The elderly woman had become almost like a mother to Jessica during those difficult months. "Are you sure you want to live there alone?" asked Mrs. Dorothy. "It's very isolated." "I'll be fine, and I'm not exactly alone. Eleanor is my neighbor. If you need anything, just come here." Living on the property revealed new challenges, but also new joys. Jessica woke up every day to bird song and slept under a starry sky like she had never seen in the big city. Gradually, she got to know the neighbors better and integrated into the community. Robert, the farmer who lived across the way, became a great friend. He taught her how to fix basic things around the house, lent tools when needed, and was always willing to help in emergencies. "You've adapted well to rural life," he commented one afternoon while they were fixing a fence. "I didn't know I liked silence and space so much," Jessica replied. "In New York, I was always running without really knowing why." "And now you know?" "Now I know I want to turn this place into something special. I'm not sure what yet, but I know it has potential." The Ladies' Tears plants were growing well at the nursing home. Jessica visited them twice a week, always bringing some gift for Mr. George and Mrs. Margaret. Fresh fruit, a homemade cake, an interesting book. The three had developed a genuine friendship. "The plants are almost ready for transplanting," Mr. George said during one of these visits. "In a few more weeks we can plant them in their permanent location." "And where would that permanent location be?" "That's for you to decide, my dear. They're yours now." Jessica had thought a lot about this. Planting the seedlings on her property would be risky, but keeping them indefinitely at the nursing home wasn't fair either. She needed a creative solution. It was while talking with Eleanor on a Sunday afternoon that the idea came up. "What if we created a medicinal plants cooperative?" her neighbor suggested. "Several people in town know how to grow herbs, but they've never organized. How would it work? Each person grows a few species on their property, and we sell the products together. That way no one draws individual attention, but the whole group makes money." "That's a brilliant idea. And your special plants could be grown in several small places instead of just one location, safer and harder to discover." They spent weeks developing the plan. They talked with other residents in the area who were interested in medicinal plants. To Jessica's surprise, there was a lot of traditional knowledge in the community. People who knew how to prepare effective syrups, ointments, and teas. Mrs. Linda, who lived on a nearby farm, grew the best chamomile in the region. Mr. Charles had a lemon balm bed that cured any insomnia. Eleanor herself was an expert in plants for digestive issues. "We can create the Hope Valley Medicinal Plants Cooperative," Jessica proposed at a meeting in the local church. "Everyone contributes with their knowledge and their production." "And how do we sell?" asked Mrs. Linda. "We can start with a stall at the neighboring town's fair. Then, if it works out, we expand to other markets." The idea excited everyone. Within 2 weeks, 10 families had joined the cooperative. Each would specialize in specific plants, sharing knowledge and dividing profits proportionally. Derek appeared again when he heard about the movement. "I heard you're organizing a plants cooperative," he said, showing up at the property on a Tuesday morning. "It's true. Any problem?" No problem at all. In fact, it might be interesting for our company. We could be exclusive buyers of the production. We're not interested in exclusivity. I can offer very attractive prices, well above the normal market. Thank you, but we're going to try selling on our own first. Derek didn't insist that day, but Jessica knew he'd be back. The pressure was mounting and she needed to speed up her plans. The cooperative's first fair was a surprising success. They sold almost everything they brought: teas, ointments, homemade syrups. Customers were impressed with the quality of the products, and many placed orders for the following week. I never imagined it would work so well, said Eleanor, counting the money at the end of the day. It's just the beginning, replied Jessica. If we keep this up, in a few months we'll need to increase production. But success brought unwanted visibility. At the next fair, Jessica noticed a man watching their stall from a distance, jotting things down in a notebook. It wasn't Derek, but he was clearly working for someone. That night, Eleanor called her, worried. Jessica, something strange happened here at my house. What? Someone entered my yard during the night. They didn't take anything, but they messed with my plants. They pulled out some seedlings and left others. Did you call the police? I did, but they said without evidence they can't do anything. Jessica realized the situation was getting dangerous. She needed to make a radical decision before someone got hurt. The next day she called Derek. I want to schedule a meeting, she said, but this time with your entire team. I want to understand exactly what you want. Finally, I can bring the company directors on Friday. No, it'll be at my property on Saturday morning, and I'll have some people with me too. No problem, see you Saturday. Jessica spent the following days preparing for the confrontation. She talked to all the cooperative members, explained the situation, and asked for support. To her surprise, no one backed down. If they want to intimidate us, they'll have to intimidate everyone together, said Robert. That's right, agreed Mrs. Linda. We won't let them disrupt our work. On Saturday morning, Jessica's property was full of people. All the cooperative members came, along with Mr. George and Mrs. Margaret, who insisted on participating. Even the town mayor showed up, curious to understand what was happening. Derek arrived accompanied by 3 men in suits and an elegant woman who introduced herself as the company's scientific director. They clearly didn't expect to find so many people. Well, said Derek, trying to maintain control of the situation, it seems we have a larger audience than expected. That's true, replied Jessica, because any decision I make will affect the whole community. The scientific director stepped forward. Miss Mitchell, I'm Dr. Jennifer Thompson. Our company is developing revolutionary medicines from medicinal plants. We have a specific interest in a species called Our Lady's Tear, which we know is related to this property. And why didn't you buy directly from the previous owners? We tried, but there were disagreements. Now we'd like to propose a partnership with your cooperative. Mr. George stood up from the bench where he was sitting. Doctor, let me explain something to you. These plants aren't for making money, they're for taking care of people. My family has preserved this knowledge for generations, not to sell to some company, but to help those in need. We understand the sentimental value, said Dr. Jennifer. But we also understand that you could benefit financially from a partnership with us. What if we refuse? Asked Jessica. Derek intervened. That would be a shame. A lot of work could be lost. The threat wasn't subtle, but this time Jessica wasn't alone. Robert approached Derek with an intimidating air. Young man, I think you'd better choose your words more carefully. There's no need for aggression, said Derek, taking a step back. The mayor, who had remained silent until then, decided to intervene. Look, everyone, let's all calm down. Dr. Jennifer, may I ask what kind of license your company has to operate in this municipality? License? Yes. For scientific research, botanical material collection, all that. Because our city hall hasn't authorized anything. The director exchanged nervous glances with Derek. We're still arranging the documentation. I see. Then I suggest you come back when you have all the paperwork in order. Then we can talk officially. The meeting ended with the embarrassed departure of the advanced biomedicine team, but Jessica knew it wasn't over. They'll be back, she told the group. Don't worry, "We'll be ready," replied Robert. In the following weeks, the cooperative strengthened its bonds and expanded its activities. They created a simple website to sell products online, established partnerships with natural product stores in the region, and even started giving courses on growing medicinal plants. The Our Lady's Tear seedlings were finally transplanted to their permanent locations, small hidden plots on the properties of 5 different cooperative members. Each person cared for a few plants, strictly following Mr. George's instructions. "It's like insurance," Jessica explained to Mrs. Margaret. "If something happens to some of the plants, the others remain safe." "Very clever, dear." George would be proud. The first harvest of the special plants happened 2 years after Jessica had found the original seeds. It was an emotional moment. The dried leaves had the exact aroma described in Mrs. Margaret's notes. "How much do you think this is worth?" asked Eleanor, admiring the bags of dried leaves. "According to my internet research, each pound could be worth up to $10,000 in the specialized market." "My goodness! And how much did you harvest?" £3 total. The money from selling the special plants to legitimate laboratories allowed Jessica to finally complete the house renovation. But instead of doing a traditional renovation, she decided to create something innovative. "I'm going to turn this place into a teaching center about medicinal plants," she announced at a cooperative meeting, "with rooms to host visitors, a laboratory to prepare products, and space for courses." "Like an educational inn?" asked Brandon. "Exactly. People come here to learn about medicinal plants, help with production, and even spend a few days in the countryside." The idea revolutionized the cooperative. Instead of just selling plants, they began selling experiences. Tourists from New York and other big cities started seeking out the center for digital detox weekends and learning about sustainable living. The fallen tree, once seen as a symbol of destruction, became the focal point of the project. Jessica created a hanging garden in the branches where dozens of medicinal plant species grow in unique harmony. Visitors are impressed by the creativity of the solution. "It's incredible how you managed to turn a tragedy into something so beautiful," commented a tourist from New York. "Sometimes life forces us to see beauty where we only see problems," replied Jessica. Derek and his company never showed up again after the cooperative gained official recognition and partnerships with universities for ethical research on medicinal plants. The project's success attracted media attention and political protection that made any kind of intimidation impossible. 3 years after buying the destroyed house, Jessica was sitting on the porch of the education center, watching a group of local school children learning about plants with Mr. George, who now spent 3 days a week at the center as a volunteer instructor. "Do you regret anything?" asked Mrs. Margaret, who had also moved into a small house specially built for the couple on the property. "Not a thing," replied Jessica. "Every crazy decision I made brought me here. And now, what are the next plans?" Jessica smiled, looking at the century-old tree that now housed the most beautiful vertical garden in the region. "Now I want to expand the project to other communities, show that it's possible to turn problems into opportunities as long as we don't give up at the first obstacle." That night, while writing in her own growing diary, which already had 3 full notebooks, Jessica reflected on the journey she had taken. She had arrived in Hope Valley as an unemployed and desperate architect. Now she was a social entrepreneur, medicinal plant expert, and leader of a cooperative that employed 15 families. "Funny thing is," she wrote, "I never planned any of this. I just followed my instinct and trusted the right people at the right time." The Medicinal Plant Center became a model for similar projects in other regions of the country. Universities sent students for internships, the government offered funding for expansion, and even ethical cosmetics companies sought out the cooperative for sustainable partnerships. But perhaps Jessica's greatest achievement was providing Mr. George and Mrs. Margaret the possibility of returning home. The couple now lived in a comfortable little house on the property, surrounded by the plants they loved and respected, as the guardians of traditional knowledge they had always been. "Sometimes I pinch myself to make sure I'm not dreaming," said Mrs. Margaret one afternoon when the two were preparing seedlings for a new project. "Me too," replied Jessica. "Who would have thought that a fallen tree could change so many things in so many people's lives?" End of story. Now tell me, what did you think of this incredible story of overcoming adversity? Do you think Jessica made the right decisions in facing all these challenges? Leave your opinion in the comments about how she turned a tragedy into a success story. If you liked it, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one.